This evening, the Q&A question will be handled by Dr. Farouk. So, Dr. Farouk, I pass the floor to you for handling it.
Thank you, Elma. Thank you, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, for, as usual, your very fiery speech, and and of course, you had basically managed to share with us the theory of political Islam from the beginning, from the time of the Prophet and the Khalif, the great Khalif, and towards Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Khaldun, and the rest, until Tahtawi, Abdu, Afghani, rather. And it was, to me, in a way that because we had written this particular book that we're going to launch tomorrow, and you had talked so much about this Islamic democracy in that particular book, and the ideas of Rashid Ghanouchi, and you seem to be, to me, very critical of him now, right? I guess it's because of that he shunned his Islamist kind of, image to become a Muslim Democrat, and you're not very happy with that, I suppose. Yeah. So I think without further delay, I would like to invite, if you have any questions, to Dr. Azzam or Dr. Kibeng, and introduce yourself and be specific to your questions and be brief. Thank you so much.
We were talking about the political theory. Then the earlier part of this thinking have been organized by, I think if you can comment on Syekh Abu Yusuf, Kitabul Kharaj. And then of course I've read. I remember you advised not to read Mubardi because it is apologetic, as you said. Apologetic. Okay. I follow your advice not to read fully Ahkam Sultan, yeah, by Al-Marwadi, because he's apologetic. He's trying to justify the corrupt system of the Umayyad Empire. Then I believe we should give a comment on the work of Maududi, Muhammad Asad, on the principle of government, and the earlier work of Sheikh Ali Abdul Razak. Because when we, after the hindsight, when we read the book of Sheikh Ali Abdul Razak, it gives substance. It provides substance to the thinking of the political Islam. Then, as early as 1928, I think, Sheikh Abdul Razak have commented that in Islam, the history of Islam is rich with knowledge, fiqh, usul, maqasid, and tafsir, hadith, ulum al-hadith, everything. But it's very poor in social science and political science. He said, because he was given opportunity of this PhD in Azhar to go to Oxford, to have a short course, 1 year, on political science. So his comment was, I said, quite reasonable, because people accuse him as the first secularist, providing secularism as a basis of justification for this. No need to reinstate the Khilafah after his demise by Kamal Atatürk. You follow? You follow my argument? I'm giving that naturally, historically, we are poor in understanding politics. Because perhaps this is a subject that is not wanted by the despotic rulers, the Caliphate. They encourage people, as you said, the development of Ummah is more among the ulama. The freedom of speech is very rich. The Imam of Abu Hanifah, Malik, Anas, bin Anas, Shafi'i, and Ahmad. But there's not many ulama during that time brave enough to talk freely on structure of to give muhasabah to the corrupt system of the Caliphate. So can you comment on this, whether there's some relevance in the thinking of Shia Ali Abdul Razik now, because people are saying about there's in secularism, we can learn a lot. If there is no secularism, as practiced in the West, as understood in the West, which I can say there's no, the state is neutral in matters regarding religion. Is what the meaning of secularism in the modern world. It's not an authority, a state or the ruler prevent people from having religion and so on. It's more the governance of the state is neutral insofar as it matters on religion.
Well, regarding the first point, I think regarding Ali Abdul Razik and his book, now we know that his book was a political device rather than a work of intellectual argument. When in 1924 Ataturk announced the official death of the caliphate, some people in Egypt thought of declaring the government in Egypt, the Khidewi, to be the next caliph. So if the Ottomans didn't want, or if the Turks didn't want the caliphate, then the Egyptians could have it. But there were people who were opposed to this idea, and they were the ones who incited Ali Abdul Razik to write his book, in which he seeks to prove that there is no such thing as an Islamic state, and that the Prophet ﷺ did not establish an Islamic state, which any reader of Sirah will easily come to refute. It's not true. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ was a divinely inspired prophet, but he was also a leader of a community. And soon after his death, the Muslim community gathered together to elect or appoint a successor, because they felt that this community needed to be governed, to be administered, and to remain united. And you couldn't do this without a political order of some sort. But it is actually the context in which Ali Abdul Razik authored his book that is more important. He had already been influenced by his own mentor at Oxford University into thinking what he thought, but someone in Egypt felt that was the time when such thinking needed to be used for political ends. Now, when we assess writings and ideas across the Muslim world, the context of each is very important. Take Mawardi, for instance. Mawardi is one of the most read books among Muslims. And it is usually read as a book that provides a political theory or a theory of governance. But actually the reason why Mawardi wrote his book is very similar to the reasons Ali Abdul Razik wrote his book. The Abbasid Caliph during Mawardi was in danger of being swept away by the Buwayhids, a Shiite rising group near Baghdad, who had been growing in influence. So Mawardi wrote a book in which he sought to convince the public that this caliph was the only legitimate ruler, and that he should not be toppled, and that although this system of governance was hereditary, and it was not like the system that existed during the rightly guided caliphate, since it existed and was endorsed by the scholars of each time, then it is legitimate. This is the argument that really Mawardi puts forward. And he cites all sorts of examples that contradict absolute Islamic values in order to show that under certain circumstances it's okay if this is done, especially when it comes to hereditary kingships. When we study Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, when we study Ibn Khaldun, when we study even contemporary thinkers, whether in the Sunni world or in the Shia world, the context of each literary work is as important as the work itself, if not more. because it gives us an indication as to what brought this to be. Take the works of Sayyid Qutb, for instance. Unless you know the context in which Sayyid Qutb wrote every one of his books, we will do a great injustice to the man, as many people do nowadays. I think what is needed today is to go back to the core values that Islam or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to uphold and implement in our lives. And that's why I quoted the verses that talk about justice and ihsan. These are the two most important values when it comes to relations among humans, whether in a Muslim society or in a human society as a whole. And at the same time, we need to look for means and methods of turning these values into practice. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the practice was the practice of the Arabs. Rasulullah ﷺ did not invent a new practice. For instance, Shura. Shura had already been in existence among the Arabs. And the Arabs practiced Shura in a specific way that continued to be practiced by the Prophet and his companions after him, until it was no longer possible for Shura to be practiced in that way. And that's when Shura was killed or was put on the shelf. And that's why Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, was the one who is quoted famously as saying that it was Muawiyah who killed Shura. Shura is a value that is mentioned in the Quran twice. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ and وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَ بَيْنَهُمْ. Shura means consultation, means counsel, means involving the public in decision making. That's what it means. But how do you involve the public in decision making? The Arabs, who were composed of tribes, were content with having the heads of the clans meet in a special place called Dar al-Nadwa, in which they discussed matters among themselves, because they were recognized by their various clans as their representatives. Now this, 50 years later, didn't work anymore. The Arabs were gone. The majority of the Muslims were not Arabs anyway. There were Persians, there were Byzantines, there were Chinese, there were Africans. People came from different cultures, they had different habits, they have different attitudes. And the challenge was to rethink the methodology. But because the Muslims were so much engaged either in conquests or in fighting each other, they had very little time for this. And also the rise of despotism prevented it, because despots didn't want to see a change, didn't want to see themselves lose the power they managed to gather in their own hands. And of course, with power comes wealth. I think in our history, the first real awakening happened during the time of Ibn Taymiyyah. Because when Ibn Taymiyyah was in Harran and then moved to Damascus, that was the time the Mongols or the Mongols invaded the region. And with the invasion of the Mongols, the entire Muslim civilization was wiped out. The Caliph ceased to exist. Whatever remained of a decaying political order ceased to exist. And that's why, interestingly enough, unlike all his predecessors, Ibn Taymiyyah did not write about the existence of a political order. He wrote about the absence of a political order. So he wanted the Muslims to face up to the challenge of creating a new political order. Not on the basis of former examples as Mawardi did in his book, but on the basis of the verses that talk about justice and ihsan. So you see, this is an issue that we really need to grasp when in the modern times we look for the establishment of a political order that is capable of delivering justice.
Good day, Doctor. I'm Daniel. I have one question for you. what is your opinion about Ayatollah Khomeini system of wilayah faqih? Could you elaborate more about that? Is it compatible with our discussions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Azzam, I have just one question, which is more current and contemporary. This is in relation to the situation in Turkey. When the AKP came into power, headed by President Erdogan, I think we have to accept the fact that when he came in, he did a lot of good things, especially on the economic aspects of life in Turkey. He has moved Turkey up the economic ladder very, very much. And initially, everybody welcomed him. But over the years, I do not know what got into him. He became more, what shall I say, insecure, to the point where he began to suspect everybody seems to be against him. So it's a bit tragic, in my point of view, that a good person like him, he has managed the country so well, but now it has come to a situation where he is not getting the support from the global powers. And with the geopolitics in Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, he's getting into a very big mess. So, what do you think of this Turkey situation? Are they going to be survive in the next 10, 15 years? Or somebody will then make him diminish in the near future? That's my question.
Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum. I'm Hilman from IIUM. I have 3 questions. The first 2 questions is a counter arguments from scholars with regards to democracy and democratization of the Middle East. So the first question is, with regards to scholars who give legal ruling or fatwa discouraging people from participating in revolution and coining the event in Syria as a failed revolution which caused more harm than benefits to the people due to attempt of toppling down the despot. Second is, there are also scholars who simply assert that democracy is simply incompatible with the Muslims in the Arabs. They are more compatible to be ruled by a strong man, which is a monarchical system. So, as a political scientist, how do you respond to this? And the third question is, okay, I forgot the third question. Just 2 for now. Thank you.
First of all, regarding Khomeini and Wilayat al-Faqih, Shiites, of course, Shiites are different groups. We are talking here about the Ithna Ashriya, the 12ers. They are called the 12ers, who believe that the Prophet ﷺ is succeeded by 12 imams, who are divine in some sense, infallible, and they, like the Prophet, could receive divine inspiration or revelation. Now, this group, the 12ers, for more than 1,000 years, insisted not to be involved in politics until the coming of the Messiah, the Mahdi. They believe that the 12th Imam is a Messiah who disappeared into a cave when he was a very young child, and they stayed for more than 1,000 years waiting for him to come out, and he has not yet come out. I don't think he'll ever come out anyway. So when the revolution happened in Iran, and the revolution was participated in by Shiite scholars like Khomeini, many others, they had to come up with a justification for becoming the rulers of the country. Because they've been telling people for hundreds of years that they had to wait for the Messiah. This is very similar to Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews also believed that the return to Palestine was haram, was forbidden. And that until their own Messiah came and took them back, it was a major sin. It was a sin for them to go back to Palestine. And that's why they opposed Zionism, many of them, until they became a small minority with the passage of time. So Wilayatul Faqih is a theory that used to be applied in the old times to social matters. And Khomeini developed it and applied it to the political system as well, and appointed himself as a deputy of the Mahdi, as deputizing for the Mahdi until the Mahdi comes. And that's why Khomeini and after him Khamenei enjoy a prestigious position that they cannot be argued with, that whatever they say has to be taken as a divine ruling. Of course, for me as a Muslim, I consider this entire theory, whether the waiting for the Mahdi until he comes out of the cave, or the trick of devising the deputy of the Mahdi until he comes, to be unacceptable. It's unacceptable on the basis of the doctrine. It's unacceptable on the basis of rationale. But anyway, they managed to establish a state, not because of this theory, but with its help. With regard to Turkey, it might be a little bit early to judge Erdogan and his system of governance or his attitude. And simply because we are not talking about a country that is running its affairs comfortably, to say the least. Turkey, like many other countries in the region, did not expect the Arab Spring. And before the Arab Spring, they were doing very well, and they were extending relations with various countries in the world, Muslim and non-Muslim equally. They were doing very well in trade. But then suddenly the Arab world explodes. And they decide to stand by the masses. And for that, some people wanted to make them pay the price, a very heavy price. And part of that heavy price was the attempted coup on the 15th of July 2016. And that was a very serious attempt. I mean, hundreds of people lost their lives. Now we know that the United Arab Emirates was involved together with some local groups. Apparently some people in the United States of America, high in office, knew about it and probably celebrated prematurely what they thought was the success of the coup. I think we have to expect that in such circumstances, the ruler and the ruling elite becomes nervous and become tense. I'm not trying to defend Erdogan and anybody else, but I'm trying to shed light on the challenges and the difficulties they are facing. The revival of the Kurdish problem after they thought they resolved it, that's another major challenge, to the extent that they decided to go into war into Syria. It's not a very good thing to do, but sometimes it's forced on you. I hear when I go to Turkey criticism from Turkish friends that Erdogan is probably becoming a dictator, that probably he is doing this, he's doing that. Luckily, Turkey is still a democracy. And it's the responsibility of the Turkish people. I mean, if the Turkish people are unhappy with him, they should exercise their right and replace him. And choose another political party. I am not familiar of any measures, probably there are, but I'm not familiar with them, that Erdogan has taken or could have taken in order to curtail the democratic process in the future. I'm not aware of that. I haven't heard criticism in this regard. He is usually criticized in the West by certain circles that we know are not so friendly toward Islam as a whole. Although Erdogan and his group come out of the system which was created by Ataturk initially, in the West they insist on branding them as Islamists, even associating them with the Muslim Brotherhood as a label. But if democracy is maintained and if it is not undermined to deny the Turkish people the right to choose, I have little to worry about. Because the system of checks and balances, media, various accountability instruments should prevent the situation from getting out of hand. But is Turkey tense? Yes, it is tense, of course. When you have suddenly 3 million Syrian refugees, when suddenly you have all sorts of groups trying to terrorize your own nation and turn certain communities against you, when the United States of America, a major partner in NATO, is arming your own enemies, a certain faction of the PKK in Syria. It's not an easy situation. Definitely, it's not an easy situation. Now, regarding the scholars our brother referred to, throughout the history of Islam, there have always been two types of scholars. What we call ulama al-sultan, the sultan's scholars. They are ready there just to issue the fatwa he wants. And these are like the medieval European church. Exactly. These scholars who either studied Islam in specialized colleges or universities, or who pose in a certain appearance, in my opinion, do not represent Islam or the Muslims. And we know them from what they say. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia today. 7 months ago, more than a dozen things were haram. Today, they are all halal. Just because Mohammed bin Salman wanted them to be halal. Suddenly, music is halal, dancing is halal, mixing is halal, women driving cars is halal, women attending football games is halal, cinemas are halal. Very soon, nightclubs will be halal. Very soon, Saudis won't need to go to Bahrain because they will provide them with everything they want, because these things will become suddenly halal. I mean, the ulama who give these fatwas are definitely not working for Allah. They work for Mohammed bin Salman. Now, those who claim that the revolutions were bad and etc. are actually working for the despots, because the revolutions were peaceful in the beginning. All the people wanted was for dignity to be recognized, for their rights to be respected. What do the people do when Assad sends his tanks and his aeroplanes and starts bombing them? When his soldiers start raping their women, what do people do in this case? So these scholars, if they were really decent and honest, they should be condemning the tyrants rather than the victims of tyranny. The same thing about democracy. When they say democracy does not suit the Muslims or the Arabs, well, does it suit the Muslims and the Arabs a despot like Sisi? Why can't we have democracy? Why, when the people of Egypt elected Mohammed Morsi out of free will, the army was mobilized with the billions of dollars paid by the UAE and Saudi Arabia in order to destroy that democratic process? For one reason they did this. Because if democracy was to be given time in Egypt, it would have definitely succeeded. And an Islamic model of democracy would have been a unique model that probably will prove much better than some of the liberal Western democracies. But they don't even want to allow that experiment to succeed. The despots in the Arab world and Iran felt threatened by the success of a Sunni democracy. And that's why Iran is in Syria today, destroying Syria together with Russia. And that's why Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates conspired against democracy in Egypt, in Libya, in Yemen, and elsewhere in the region. What is democracy? Let's ask these scholars, what do they understand by democracy? They'll probably tell you democracy is kufr, that's it. That's all they know. Kufr in what way? How was Abu Bakr chosen caliph? If you compare the manner in which he was elected or the manner in which Umar was elected, purely democratic in the sense that the people made a free choice. Today's democracy, if we talk about the model of liberal democracy, consists of two components: an ideological component and a procedural component. We may have issue with the ideological component, and we are not under any obligation to adopt the ideological component that believes in liberalism, in aspects of modernity that severs all ties with religion. We don't have to do this. In the West, they needed to do this because their experience with religion was a very negative experience. In our case, it's not like that. Now, the procedural aspect of democracy is about elections, is about the rule of law, is about equality before the law, is about basic human rights, is about minority rights, it's about checks and balances, and all of these are 100% compatible with Islam and with common sense.
Okay, I do apologize if this question is offensive, but I'm curious about the Morsi's, when just before Sisi took over, Morsi did, he gave himself immunity powers right at the end. There was a point where there was immunity for all his actions. Why did he do this? Why was this done? Because it seems so incompatible with the whole purpose that brought him into power. Because it was very, it seemed very against character. So, but if you could enlighten us.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Azzam. My name is Zamani Zakaria. My questions are, there are two parts to my question. Yeah? Firstly, I'd like to get your view in terms of the establishment of the Islamic State or the Islamic order, yeah, for humanity. Yeah? Because we Muslims believe that Islam has come for humanity, not for just Muslims. It's for the world. Yeah? So the Muslims need to do their job to invite all others to Islam. And maybe for so long a time, invitation to Islam to the non-Muslims have not been given priority by the Muslims themselves. Perhaps at one time, the Muslims were fighting with each other. Perhaps at another time, there was so much misunderstanding about the Islamic agenda, such that those who are against the Islamic agenda rose to fight against the Muslims, not understanding actually what the Islamic message should be. You know? See, what I notice is that every time when there is a rise of a Muslim movement or a process towards establishment of government, it is quickly and with intent being destroyed by certain parties among the Muslims and also certain parties outside. For example, Algeria, when FIS actually won in the elections, but soon after that we saw a lot of things happening, unexplainable things happening, such that the military came in and FIS was destroyed. We saw in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, or last time it was East Pakistan and West Pakistan, the feeling towards Jamati Islami. Yeah? And then we saw in the uprising, the Arab Spring. Yeah? When the uprising was happening in Egypt, apparently the West was very interested to see the uprising, or supposedly interested to see the uprising successful. They want Hosni Mubarak to be removed, you know. And to the extent that when the Egyptian authorities start to ban or restrict YouTube and Yahoo and whatever other things, the West helped to do mirroring of the sites so that the Egyptian population can still continue on the social media. You know? And then Morsi won. Ikhwan Muslimin won. You know? They tried to set up a government. But then we saw the West was uncomfortable and they would like that government under Muslim Brotherhood to be destroyed. You know? So what I'm trying to say is this. Why are we going through all this process over and over again? And it appears to be making Islam as a misunderstood religion. Even the book by the brother Said Qutb wrote. So I think the answer lies a lot in the Muslims actually going out to promote Islam, to propagate Islam, to invite people to Islam, and to show good examples. Because at the moment, it's not easy to use the Muslim population as a good example for many things, you know. There was an Arab TV channel that showed even in Japan, how the people were much more organized and much more disciplined as compared to the people in the Muslim countries. Even one scholar, I think, I forgot his name, he said that in France, he saw Islam in France, but he didn't see Islam in the Muslim countries. So can you elaborate on this? Thank you.
Prof, to explain a bit further to us the difference between Muslim Democrat and Islamist. Is just a matter of naming or there is some substance there? Thank you.
Regarding the question about Mohammed Morsi, it's not exactly that what happened. It's so much was happening every day, every hour in Egypt at the time. But when Brother Mohammed Morsi issued that order or presidential decree, he needed to guarantee that the army and the constitutional court, which was under the control of the army, stopped repealing his orders. Because every time he said something, they went to the constitutional court, and the constitutional court nullified his order. And the reason he needed to do this is that the army had dissolved the parliament. So there was no parliament. An elected parliament was dissolved. That 1 year during which Dr. Morsi ruled before he was removed, in my opinion, is still highly undocumented, because many of the people involved have either been killed or are in prison. There are a few in the diaspora, but they don't have the full story. But imagine if you are an elected president, and then whenever you want to do something, an unelected body empowered by the army impedes you and prevents you from doing anything. He needed, prior to the election of the parliament, which was supposed to happen soon afterwards, had the coup not taken place, he wanted to get certain things done. And that's the way he felt he needed to do it. And unfortunately, he came under unfair attack by his opponents, and they tried to say things about it. And many of the people, by the way, who criticized them for this, supported the coup afterwards. I mean, how can you be so sensitive about what a democratically elected president does, and then you go and support the army to crush the democratic experience altogether? The comment, the brother, the long comment about Muslims, and well, some of what you said I agree with, but I don't agree that the West supported the Arab revolutions. No, the West was taken by surprise, and the West thought this was a reality it could not prevent from happening. So to a large extent they stayed away. But it was the despots in the Arab world, especially in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who started preparing for the counter-revolution, and who sent delegation after delegation to Washington, to London, and to Paris, and probably to other capitals, to tell them that if we allow Morsi to rule, and if we allow the Muslim Brotherhood to rule, this would be most detrimental to your interests and to our interests. But it wasn't really the West that stood by the Arab revolutions, as you explained. And I agree with you, of course, that Islam did not come for a certain community. I mean, how come that you Malays are Muslims today? How come we have Persian Muslims, we have Chinese Muslims, we have Japanese Muslims, we have American Muslims, European Muslims? Islam is a universal religion. The Arabs were not Muslim when Islam came. Islam started with one man, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he was joined by his wife Khadija, and then by his cousin Ali, and then by his friend Abu Bakr, and then it started expanding. Are the Muslims not doing enough to portray Islam in a positive way? Definitely. There are even many Muslims who have no job other than giving Islam a bad image. And that's really regrettable. And we find this everywhere, and especially where there are non-Muslim communities, and these non-Muslim communities are exposed to very bad practices by Muslims. And as a result, they are deterred and they are driven away from Islam. Actually, da'wah throughout the history of Islam was successful not verbally, was successful because of an example. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about his Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. You have an example in the life of the Prophet for those who seek Allah and the last day. It's a model, it's an example where there is mercy, compassion, adl, ihsan. These are the values that the Muslims should be living among themselves and with others as well. Because Islam is about humanity, it's not about a certain race or a certain ethnic affiliation. Now, what's the difference between a Muslim Democrat and an Islamist? When I wrote my book, and the publisher, Oxford University Press, wanted to publish it, we started thinking about the title. What title to give the book? You know, publishers want catchy titles, marketable titles. The original title of my thesis, because this was my PhD thesis, was Transitional Problems to Democratization in the Middle East. Not a very nice title for a book. Because I took Rashid Ghannouchi as a study case, actually my thesis was not originally about Rashid Ghannouchi. It was about what prevents democratization from taking place in the Middle East. But I took Ennahda and Rashid Ghannouchi as a study case. So I came up with this title, Rashid Ghannouchi, a Democrat within Islamism. So as if Islamism is not democratic and Rashid Ghannouchi is this very special, unique individual. He was actually the head of the political department in the Muslim Brotherhood. So he was a pure Islamist. So I was describing an Islamist, Rashid Ghannouchi, as a Democrat. Because I myself was a Democrat. I considered myself a Democrat. I don't see a contradiction between being an Islamist and a Democrat. Although I don't like the term Islamist. Never liked it. Because this is a term that was coined by opponents of the Muslim Brotherhood to give an impression that it is something negative, that is different from being a Muslim. No, we are Muslims. We are just ordinary Muslims. But we believe that we have something to offer to humanity. We have an understanding of Islam that we believe is the middle way Islam. We don't want to be called anything, but if people call you a name, and then this name becomes so popular that to the extent that you start using it yourself to call yourself, that's the dilemma. And that's why there shouldn't be two groups. A group calling itself Muslim Democrats and a group calling itself Islamists. There's no such thing. We are Muslims. Forget about all names. We are Muslims. We either believe in democracy or we don't. Even if you don't believe in democracy, you are still a Muslim. There's nothing wrong with not believing in democracy, apart from probably causing us some problems. But it's up to you if you don't want to believe in democracy. It's a free house, it's a free world. What we need to do, rather than branding each other and calling each other names, is encourage debate. Let's encourage each other to discuss things. Whether you like me or not, whether I like you or not, let's sit together and see where we disagree. Perhaps out of this discussion, something very good can emerge.
Thank you, Dr. Azzam. Tomorrow, probably because we're having Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad as well with Sheikh Abu Arwah tomorrow. Because it seems that there's a shift in the political milieu of our society, that the Islamists now turn to become Democrats, Muslim Democrats. It was after Ghannouchi made an announcement that, we are no more Islamists, we are Muslim Democrats. So what is your take on that?
Well, I was in Tunis when that announcement was made, and I was very angry, and I wrote articles about it, and they didn't like them. I can understand that our brothers in Tunisia are under considerable pressure. I understand that. And I understand and I know that they were threatened. But that is not justification for shedding your skin, for pretending to be someone else. It doesn't work. And trust me, nobody believes them. Nobody believes them. They come up with this very weird idea of separating the da'wi from the siyasi, the missionary from the political. And they said that now, since Tunisia is in a new era of democracy, we don't need to be involved in da'wah. That we are a political party and we should involve ourselves only in politics. You are actually doing the bidding of the secularists by saying this. This is the argument of the secularists, which Rashid Ghannouchi fought against for no less than 30 years. He even wrote a book about this. Because we don't believe as Muslims that there is such a separation between the political and the religious. There is a division of labor, yes. I know that certain individuals if it were up to me, are not fit to be members of parliament. But that's because of them as individuals, not because of a certain idea or because of Islam, because we have different capacities. I mean, someone who is unable to make compromises cannot enter a political process, because the political process is about compromises. I mean, someone like me, I'm not fit to be a member of parliament, because I'll fight everybody. It doesn't work. So I'd rather stay out, fight them in my open space. But if you, and this is the problem. I have actually a very interesting paper on this, and I think it's online. I presented it when I was a visiting professor at Kyoto University in Japan, about the Jordanian experience with this, because we had this experience in Jordan. When our brothers entered the political process in 1989, when we had the first ever and last free elections, they needed people who were popular in the community. Who are the popular ones in the community? The khutaba, khatibs. The people who give the Friday sermon. They are very popular. But are they good politicians? Not necessarily. Probably some of would, but not necessarily. So it's not a qualification. Being popular because you give the khutbah every Friday and because people like what you say, especially if you are a fiery speaker, that doesn't mean that when you are in parliament you will do a very good job, or when you are a minister you will do a very good job. So we need to learn from that lesson. But of course, power has a sweet taste. When people become MPs and end up having some privileges, they want to keep that. And that results afterwards in internal feud within the movement. But it is a fact that we have to have a division of labor. But to say that I, Rashid Ghannouchi, will no longer talk about da'wah, I consider this to be a grave mistake. Why? Why are you denying yourself your basic right? You have the right to say to what is wrong, wrong, and to what is good, is good. You have the right to say to people, fear God. You have the right to, if you go to a mosque on Friday and people love you and appreciate you and they invite you to give a khutbah, go and give a khutbah. But to say, I am either in politics or in da'wah, I think that was a very dangerous approach, and it came under pressure from their coalition members in Tunisia. That if you want to stay in power, you have to do this. I would have rather preferred that they left politics altogether rather than come to this sort of conclusion. So this is where it comes from. So what do we call you now that you are no longer involved in this? And what? Oh, call me Muslim Democrats. Okay, drop Democrats. Just call me a Muslim. Just call me a Muslim. I don't want to be anything else. Tell me, what does Allah expect from you as a Muslim? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. What Allah is saying to us? Believing men and believing women are partners together in this process in which they order that which is good and forbid that which is bad. What does it mean? It means politics. It means criticizing the regime, criticizing politicians. It means asking for reform. It means asking for democracy, genuine democracy. It means defending human rights. And if you are defending human rights, you will anger the tyrants. And if you anger the tyrants, you may end up in prison. You may even end up being hanged. Is that the end of the story? No, it's not the end of the story. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us, سيد الشهداء حمزة ورجل قام إلى سلطان جائر فأمره ونهاه فقتله. The master of martyrs is Hamza, and a person or a man, and a man here means can be man or woman, and a person or an individual who stands up to a tyrant, tells the tyrant you are wrong, and as a result the tyrant kills him. Martyrdom, a great value in Islam, because you die for a noble idea. Dying for a noble idea, dying in defense of freedom and dignity is a great thing in Islam. It's not the end of the story. You end up being in the companion of the prophets. I mean, look at all these cowards in the Muslim world who want to be in the company of tyrants. These tyrants will go to hell. Do you want to go with them to hell? These tyrants embezzle the wealth of the nation. They're building skyscrapers with the money of the nation. They're giving Trump billions of dollars to kill the Muslims in Syria and Iraq. They're buying a painting for Jesus Christ, which is doubtful whether it is a genuine one or not, and they paid $500 million for it. These are tyrants. They are going to hell, unless, of course, they repent. I don't mind if they repent. I hope they repent. I ask Allah that they repent. It would be good for us if they repent. But if they don't repent and you stay in their company, you go to hell, you might as well stay in the company of those who seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Forgive me if what I say might be offensive to some. But from my own observation about these Muslim nations on earth, if you look from the west of Africa, right all the way to Malaysia, Indonesia, and you look at the social and economic indicators, the Muslim nations are at the very bottom. Infant mortality rate, literacy rate, GDP, everything seems to be at the bottom. You compare with the developed nation in Western Europe or America or Canada, there's no way that the Muslim can catch up. My regret or my sadness is this. While we may seem to be talking about the great history of Islam, that we are almost like the chosen people, you can be successful, but we don't seem to be giving the right emphasis, right focus, right support to tackle the issue of economic and social justice. Mind you, anyone if you talk to about religion, they would agree that God is the Almighty. He is the one who will determine your future, your fate. But the thing is, if you do not tackle their bread and butter issue, you cannot put food on the table, that is meaningless to them, you know. I believe that any Islamic or Muslim government, you must tackle these economic and social issues. The food, the bread and butter issues. There's no point fighting for something and you are hungry, your children are not feeding. So my contention is, whatever you aspire to be on the reality. Get your feet closer to the ground and see where we have gone wrong. I think God has given us all the wealth in the world. We've got oil, we've got minerals. In fact, some of the Muslim countries has got a lot more PhDs compared to some Western European nation. So my request here is that, can we be a bit more pragmatic in the approach? Real issues, the bread and butter issues, for the majority of the Muslim population. Okay, that's all.
Well, what's the solution then? You tell me. We've been talking all the while about our aspiration for good governance. I believe good governance is the solution. Why do we have poverty? Why do we have poverty in a country like Saudi Arabia? Why? Why there are so many people who are homeless in Saudi Arabia, when Saudi Arabia is sitting on the largest oil reserve in the world? Why? Because there is no accountability. Because the ruler behaves like God. He cannot be asked questions, cannot be called to account. Why our Muslim leaders are the worst thieves in the world? Everywhere you go across the Muslim world, they're all thieves. How come that someone comes to power in a country like Libya or Yemen, penniless, and then ends up getting out of power with a wealth of $40 billion? Where did it come all from? I agree with you, we have these problems, but we have these problems not because we are Muslims. We have these problems because we don't have good governance. We need to struggle to have that good governance. And this is where we're talking about Islamic political thought, what sort of political theory we need, whatever, etc. The Arab revolutions, to some people, were ignited by poverty. To some people, they were ignited by the sense of humiliation suffered under these dictatorships. Morsi, a few months into his presidency, made a slogan, and I believe that he was removed because of that slogan, at least partly. He said, "We will never stand on our feet until we manufacture our food, we manufacture our medicines, and we manufacture our weapons." These are three things that we have to work on. Because once you do this, you will not need to bow yourself to anybody. You have your food, you have your medications, and you have your weapons to defend yourself. Why did they topple him? Why didn't they give him a chance to fail naturally if they knew he was going to fail? They knew he was going to succeed. That's why they intervened. Only months into his presidency, he resolved the bread problem in Egypt. For the first time in Egyptian history, he resolved the problem of the bread. He ended the stealing of petrol from petrol stations. That was a major conspiracy hatched by influential figures within the army and the political elite. He was on his way to resolving all of this because he was elected by the people and he felt accountable to the people. And this is what we want. And when that happens, hopefully that will be the end of all our miseries.
I'm E. I realize that you focus a lot on the Western model of democracy as a means to good governance. I agree with that. But then can you please circumvent that Western model? All right, probably you could sort of draw a parallel from the Holy Al-Quran to the ultimate end of the good governance. Thank you.
If I understood your question correctly, you mean to say, where do we proceed from the initial position of learning from the Western model of democracy? The Western model of democracy has proven to have major deficiencies. The most obvious one is that this liberal model of democracy was designed in-house, not worldwide. And that's why the most brutal colonial powers in the world were the oldest democracies in the world: Britain, France, and the United States of America. Because they believe that whatever progress they achieved was achieved for their own community. And they would share aspects of it with the rest of the world on the basis of an exchange of interests only. And that's why you'll find Theresa May, who is an elected prime minister in Britain, receiving one of the most brutal dictators in the world, giving him a red carpet reception. What is the justification for this? Yeah, Mohammed bin Salman. I mean Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, who yesterday was in London. She was asked in Parliament about his record of human rights and what she would say about this, his attitude and his government's attitude. And all she had to say is that this is a country we have strong relations with and very important interests. They want to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia so that Saudi Arabia will use those weapons to kill our brothers and sisters in Yemen. All they care about is for their factories to continue working. This aspect of democracy, which is so selfish and doesn't care about other the communities elsewhere in the world, is the one that we need to do something about, definitely. And that's why I believe on the basis of the values of Islam, which are universal values, whereby as a Muslim, I am expected to do justice to every human being, irrespective of their ethnicity, of their race, of their religion, of their geographic allocation, that we can develop an Islamic system of governance that benefits from the procedural aspects of democracy, whereby we can guarantee that the ruler is elected and accountable, but at the same time, the values of universality, the values of Islam inform us when it comes to practicing that aspect of procedural democracy. So this is the sort of thing that I'm looking forward to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azzam Tamimi. Thank you, Dr. Okibeng. And thank you everyone for attending the talk tonight. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll have a book launch and a forum as well. Can Islamists be Democrats? I don't know whether Prof, you like the topic or not, but you know, it's debatable. I hope that the panelists would do justice as well, and we can have a good debate on that topic, inshallah. With that, I would like to thank you everyone, and inshallah, I'll see you again tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi.